The card arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I water the plants on the back porch, and I had just come inside with dirt still under my fingernails when I heard the mail slot click. I set down the watering can, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked to the front door the way you do when you're 63 years old and nothing in the world feels particularly urgent anymore. It was a birthday card. My daughter's handwriting on the envelope, loopy and rushed the way it's always been, even when she was 9 years old turning in homework assignments. I smiled before I even opened it. Inside, she'd written, "Mom, we should do something really special this year. You deserve it. Love always." I put the card on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. I live in Georgia now, have for 11 years, and I still buy everything with peaches on it like a tourist who never went home. My late husband would have teased me about that. I still reach for the phone sometimes to tell him things. His name was Edmund. No, that's not right. His name doesn't matter to this story. What matters is that he left me well enough that I didn't have to worry. A modest house paid off. A savings account I'd been building quietly for decades, folding money into it the way my mother taught me. $10 here, $50 there, every birthday check from relatives I barely knew. By the time I turned 63, I had enough that I could breathe. And my daughter knew that. My son-in-law knew it too. Her name is Adele. She's 38. Beautiful, the way her father was beautiful. Good bones, easy laugh, eyes that crinkle at the corners. She married a man named Shepard 4 years ago. I call him my son-in-law because that is what he is on paper. But I want to be honest with you. I never fully trusted the way he looked at my daughter like she was something he'd acquired, something that reflected well on him. I told myself I was being an old woman with old instincts. I kept the thought to myself and smiled at every dinner and bought them a very nice espresso machine for their wedding. That card on the refrigerator, the one about doing something special, it started a conversation that went on for about 3 weeks. Texts, phone calls, Sunday afternoon visits where Adele would sit at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug and say things like, "Mom, wouldn't it be beautiful? Wouldn't it be something to remember?" She wanted to go to the mountains, a cabin in Asheville, North Carolina. 7 days, the whole family, her, Shepard, their 2 boys, and me. She painted it in colors I couldn't resist. Fall foliage, a fireplace, board games in the evenings, hiking trails in the mornings. The boys are 7 and 9. I hadn't spent real time with them in over a year because of schedules and distance and the vague friction that had been building between me and Shepard that nobody ever named out loud. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Adele had looked up a cabin, sent me the link with a string of leaf emojis. It slept 8 people, had a wraparound porch, a hot tub, a game room. It cost $4,200 for the week. She didn't ask me to pay, but she didn't not ask me either. There was a silence after she sent the link, the kind that sits and waits, and I was the kind of mother who had spent 40 years filling silences like that. I booked the cabin, put it on the card I keep for large expenses, sent Adele the confirmation number. She sent back 3 heart emojis. I started making lists. I am a list person, always have been. I wrote down what each grandchild liked to eat, planned to make my cornbread on the first night, looked up trails that weren't too steep for a 63-year-old woman who walks every morning but is not, as I sometimes have to remind my knees, 25 anymore. I bought a new fleece. I bought books for the boys. I bought a puzzle with 500 pieces that showed the Blue Ridge Mountains at sunset, thinking we'd do it together on the long evenings. I was happy. I want you to understand that. I was genuinely, unguardedly happy about this trip in a way I hadn't been about anything in a while. Since my husband died, the holidays had felt like obligations I fulfilled, rather than things I enjoyed. This felt like something real. Something coming back. 6 weeks before the departure date, my daughter called on a Wednesday evening. I was in the middle of folding laundry, the television on low in the background. I tucked the phone between my ear and shoulder the way I always do. She said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." That is never a sentence that ends well. She told me that Shepard's parents had recently gone through some things. She was vague about what things, and that they were having a hard time and really needed a family trip, some healing time, and that Shepard had suggested inviting them to the cabin. His parents, his sister, and the sister's boyfriend. 4 more people. I said, "That's a lot of people, Adele." She said, "Mom, the cabin sleeps 8. We'd be fine." I said, "It sleeps 8, but we're already 5. She said, "The boys can share. It's fine. They like being together." I listened. I kept folding laundry. A pillowcase, then a fitted sheet, which I have never once folded correctly in my entire life and have long since made peace with. Then I said, "So Shepard's parents, his sister, and her boyfriend, that's 4 more people, and I booked this cabin for our trip." She said, "Mom, I knew you'd make it a thing." That phrase, "make it a thing," I had heard it before. It was Shepard's phrase, actually. I had watched it migrate from his mouth into my daughter's over the years of their marriage, the way certain words and ways of speaking do when 2 people live closely together. He used it whenever I expressed a preference that inconvenienced him. When I mentioned I didn't like a particular restaurant, when I said the boys were getting too old for certain behavior to go uncorrected. Mom makes everything a thing. I said, "I'm not making anything a thing. I'm pointing out that I reserved and paid for this cabin for our family." She said, "Shepard's family is our family." There was a pause, and then she said, "He said you'd react this way." I put down the pillowcase. I said, "Who is he in that sentence?" She didn't answer directly. She said, "Mom, can you just be flexible? Just this once. Just this once." As though it were once. As though the espresso machine and the cabin and the birthdays and the school clothes and the car repairs and the down payment I helped them with 3 years ago, which nobody had ever mentioned repaying, were not a long and well-documented history of my flexibility. I said I would think about it. I needed to get off the phone. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the middle of my unfolded laundry, and I looked at the wall. My husband's reading lamp is still on his side of the room. I haven't moved it. Some things you keep where they are. I thought about calling my friend Odessa. No, my friend. Her name is not on any list I need to avoid, but I will call her what she is, my oldest friend, 61 years old, a retired school teacher from Memphis who moved to Atlanta 6 years ago and who I have coffee with every other Friday. She would have told me to say no. She has been telling me to say no for 20 years. I wasn't ready to hear it that night, so I didn't call. Instead, I opened my laptop and I looked at the cabin reservation. I read the cancellation policy. There was a window. If I canceled within 72 hours of booking, full refund. I had booked 6 weeks ago. The window was long closed, $4,200, non-refundable. I stared at that number for a long time, and then I thought, maybe it will be fine. Maybe I'm the one making it a thing. I called Adele back and I said, "Okay, tell Shepard's family they're welcome." She sounded so relieved it almost hurt me. She said, "Mom, thank you. This is going to be so wonderful, I promise." She did not say she would contribute to the cost. I did not ask. See how that works? How you can watch yourself making the same mistake again in real time, and you do it anyway because you don't want to be the person who makes it a thing. The next few weeks I received a few texts from Adele about logistics. What time were we leaving? Could I bring extra towels? Did I know a good route to avoid traffic on I-85? I answered all of them. I kept making my lists. I kept the puzzle wrapped in its cellophane in the trunk of my car. Then, 12 days before the trip, Adele called again. She said, "Mom, I have to tell you something." That sentence again. Like a key in a lock. She told me that Shepard's parents' situation had resolved. She still wouldn't tell me what the situation had been, and that they were actually doing well enough now that they wanted to celebrate. And that Shepard thought it would be nice if just his family did the cabin, had some real time together as his family unit, without, and here she paused for just a half second, without extra people. I said, I want to make sure I understand you. She said, Mom, I said, Shepard's parents, his sister, her boyfriend, and your family are going to use the cabin that I booked and paid for, and I am the extra person. She said, I knew you'd phrase it that way. I said, Adele, is that what is happening? Long silence. She said, it's not personal, Mom. Shepard just thinks. I said, stop. Don't tell me what Shepard thinks. Tell me what you think. Another silence. Longer. She said, Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll have other chances to see the boys. Other chances to see the boys. My grandsons, 7 and 9, who I had bought books for, who I had planned cornbread for, whose favorite snacks I had written on a list. I said, I'll call you later. I did not call her later. I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The peach magnet on the refrigerator. Her birthday card still up there next to it. Mom, you deserve something really special this year. I thought about what I wanted to do. I thought about crying and decided not to. I thought about calling Adele back and saying something I would regret, and decided not to do that either. I thought about calling my oldest friend, and this time I actually picked up the phone. She said, I'm on my way over. She arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and the particular expression she wears when she has been right about something for years and is choosing, out of love, not to say so. We sat at my kitchen table. I told her everything. She poured the wine. She listened. When I was done, she said, So what are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to call Adele and beg to be included in a trip I paid for. And I'm not going to sit here in this house for 7 days feeling sorry for myself while Shepard's family uses my cabin. She said, So what then? I looked at my wine glass. I looked at the peach magnet. I said, The reservation is in my name. The card it's charged to is mine. The booking confirmation is in my email. She tilted her head. She understood before I finished the sentence. I went to my laptop. I opened the cabin rental website. I found the contact number for the management company. I called them that same evening, and I explained that there had been a change in the guest list and asked what my options were for modifying the reservation. The woman on the phone was helpful. She explained that since I was the account holder and primary guest, I had full authority to modify or cancel the reservation, subject to the non-refundable policy since we were inside the full cancellation window. I asked if I could change the dates of the reservation. She said yes for a small fee. I asked if I could change the names on the guest list. She said yes. I said, I'd like to keep the reservation and update the guest list. I'm going, just with different people. She said, of course. She'd send me a modification form. I sat at that kitchen table and I texted 3 women. My oldest friend was already sitting across from me, so I told her directly. The other 2 I texted, my cousin Marjorie, who is 66 and recently retired and who I have been meaning to spend real time with for years, and my neighbor Anita, who is 59 and who I have walked with every morning for 4 years and who has heard more about my life than almost anyone and who laughed when I told her what happened with a laugh that meant absolutely not. We are going. Within 40 minutes, I had 3 yeses. I updated the reservation, 4 guests. My name, my oldest friend, Marjorie, Anita. I did not call Adele. I texted her. I said, I've made a change to the reservation. The cabin will be unavailable for Shepard's family during those dates. I hope you're able to find something else. I love you. She called immediately. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, Mom, what are you doing? Shepard's parents are already planning. This is so embarrassing. I replied, "This is my reservation," I replied. "This is my reservation. I'm using it." She texted, "Fine. Can you at least refund the deposit Shepard put in?" I stared at that message for a full minute. Then I typed, "Shepard didn't pay a deposit. I paid for the whole reservation. There is nothing to refund." She didn't respond. My son-in-law called from his number an hour later. I did not answer. I have not spoken to him since. I want to tell you about the trip because the trip is the part that matters most. We left on a Saturday morning in October, the four of us in my car, the puzzle in the trunk, enough food in a cooler that we probably didn't need to stop at a grocery store, but stopped anyway because that's what you do on road trips. Marjorie brought a playlist from her phone that she described as classic soul, "Don't Argue With Me," and nobody argued with her. We sang for about 40 miles until we hit the mountains, and then we all went quiet because the mountains asked for quiet. The cabin was more beautiful than the photos. The porch wrapped all the way around, and in the mornings you could sit out there with coffee and watch the fog lift off the valley. I made my cornbread on the first night. Nobody at that table had grandchildren waiting for it, but nobody needed to. We ate it anyway, and it was good. I did the puzzle. We all did the puzzle. It took us 4 evenings, and Anita was absolutely insufferable about finding the hard pieces first, and we loved her for it. I hiked a trail on the third morning. Not a hard one, I know my knees, but a real trail with real elevation, through trees that had turned colors I don't have the right words for. I stopped at the top, and I looked out at the ridge, and I thought about my daughter, and I let myself feel sad for exactly as long as I needed to, which was about 10 minutes. And then I turned around and walked back down, and my oldest friend met me at the trailhead with a water bottle and said, "I ordered us lunch from that place with the fried green tomatoes. Come on." On the last night, we sat on the porch after dinner with blankets around our shoulders and the stars the way they only look when you're far enough from city lights. Marjorie talked about her husband, who passed 2 years ago. Anita talked about her daughter, who'd just gotten into nursing school. My oldest friend was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I keep thinking about how close I came to not coming. I almost said I was too busy." I said, "I'm glad you came." She said, "I'm glad you called." I thought about Adele. I thought about my grandsons, who I do love, who I will always love, who are 7 and 9 and did not choose any of this. I thought about what it means to love someone and still not let them take something from you that was yours. I thought about my husband, who would have told me. I know exactly what he would have said. He would have said, "You always did know how to take care of yourself. You just didn't always believe it." I believe it now. I came home on a Sunday afternoon and unpacked my bag and washed my fleece and watered the plants on the back porch. I put the puzzle box on the shelf in the living room. I left the peach magnet on the refrigerator. But I took down the birthday card. Adele and I have not spoken yet. I expect we will, eventually, when the air clears enough for a real conversation. One where she tells me what she actually thinks, instead of what Shepard tells her to think. I am not holding my breath, and I am not in a hurry. Love is patient, but love also has limits, and learning where yours are is not cruelty. It's survival. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I have worked and grieved and given and waited and smiled through things that deserved more than a smile. I have filled silences that were never mine to fill. I have made myself smaller in rooms where I built the table everyone was sitting at. I will not be doing that anymore. The mountains were beautiful. The cornbread was good. The fog lifted every morning right on time, and I was there to see it, and I did not spend a single day of that week being grateful to someone for allowing me to exist. That is the whole story. That is the only thing I needed to tell you. I keep thinking about that pillowcase, how I set it down on the bed in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday evening, and something in me went very still. People talk about moments of clarity like they're lightning. Sudden, dramatic, impossible to miss. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was quiet. It was the sound of my own voice saying, I'm not going to call her back and beg. Not angry, not loud, just certain. And I realized that certainty had been building in me for a long time, maybe years, and I had been talking over it with excuses and flexibility and the desire to keep the peace. What happened with the cabin wasn't really about the cabin. It was the accumulated weight of every time I had handed something over without being asked, then received silence in return. Every silence I filled, every room I made myself smaller in. At some point, the math catches up with you, and you either keep going the same direction or you stop and look at where you actually are. I think about Adele, and I don't think about her with bitterness. I want to be honest about that. I think about her the way you think about someone you love who is in the middle of learning something hard. She is 38, she has time, but she has also spent 4 years letting a man's voice replace her own judgment, and that is its own kind of loss, one she may not feel until much later. I hope she feels it before too long. I hope she comes to me when she does. What I know is that you cannot shortcut the consequences of how you treat people. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because relationships are built of repeated actions and repeated silences, and eventually the structure you've built is the structure you live in. Adele and Shepard built something with their choices. I had been quietly handing them the materials for years. Stopping was not punishment. It was just me finally reading the blueprint. There is a kind of wisdom that only comes from paying attention, not to what people say they value, but to what they actually do when something costs them. My son-in-law has never paid for anything, not literally, not figuratively. He has never extended himself, and I watched my daughter learn to call that normal. That is a failure of something deeper than manners. It is a failure of the honest self-examination that keeps a person decent over time. And then there is the question of what you do with that knowledge once you have it. Knowing something and acting on it are different muscles entirely. I had known for a long time, acting on it. Changing the guest list, picking up the phone and calling Marjorie, driving up into those mountains with women who actually wanted me there. That took something I had been slowly building back inside myself for years without quite realizing it. The fog lifted every morning right on schedule. It didn't need my permission, and it didn't need my suffering. It just rose when it was time. I am 63 years old. I still have mornings left. I intend to be present for them.